Hi, good evening, and welcome to the Graduate School of Architecture at the University of Johannesburg. My name is Mark Raymond. I'm the director of the GSA, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to the second of our practice lecture series, chat. And of course, at the end, we will be having questions. You can pose any questions you would like to Mxolisi about what he's spoken about, or any thoughts, make any comments that have come up. That you can share with the audience. And I see we have a really good turnout once again this evening, I'm proud to say. And I think I will stop there. And Mxolisi, if you want to turn on your mic, I'm going to turn off my camera and my microphone. Learning about yourself, your practice, your research interests, and also Blackboard Design Lab. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you to all the familiar names that are popping up in the background. I'm looking forward to the opportunity to share our practice and reflect on what has been a trying 10 years and where we are now and where we might be going. Thank you. I'm truly honored to address some of my own students here at the University of Johannesburg, former students from other universities, faculty members, and those who hold a keen interest in the going-ons of our profession. As I metaphorically stand before you in response to Mark's gracious invitation, I must admit that my initial eagerness to partake was tinged with apprehension. The task at hand was more than mere presentation of our architectural projects, which in some ways would have been easier. Instead, it beckoned for the exploration of our ways of working. Delving into this task, it became evident that our journey over the past decade had often taken unconventional routes, which some business experts might even label as a recipe for what not to do. Memories of Mr. Phil Mashabane's stern reminders in various settings regarding the Architects Act resurfaced as reminders we had skirted and managed to tiptoe around the legal boundaries. However, my academic roles at the University of Johannesburg, spanning both undergraduate and postgraduate levels, have led me to recognize that the aura of mystery surrounding architectural practice can deter many young architects from taking their first steps. Addressing you today gives me the chance to reflect on the past 10 years, offering insights into some of our failures and why a level of ignorance may be bliss. Our journey is only one of many paths to running a practice. In fact, at times I had considered calling the presentation Falling Forward. I've structured the presentation so that it reads chronologically through our practice's life from my perspective. I've then embedded some instances that inform the way we work and modify the ways we work. As a start, let me introduce myself. I was born in 1982 in Soweto, Johannesburg, to my mom, Lillian Irene Makhubo, a nurse, and Patrick Makhubo, a photographer, and by pragmatism, an eventual librarian. The fluidity of cultures shaped my early life. Growing up in Tladi Township and later Chiawelo, my interactions with Tsonga, Zulu, Chivenda, and Sesotho languages nurtured a profound cultural adaptability, characteristic of many children growing up in the interregnum of post-apartheid South Africa. Around 1994, amidst the optimism of the Government of National Unity, my parents enrolled me in John Mitchell Primary School in Jeppes Here, surrounded by Portuguese culture and the Victorian architecture, I forged my first friendships across racial lines. Subsequently, I attended Jeppe High School for Boys in Kensington, a school famous for its rugby and cricket, which never really grabbed my attention. Within a circle of friends who originated from various townships, we found solace in unity as we navigated the challenges of racial microaggressions and hypermasculine attitudes. Eventually, most of us would be seminal actors in the then emerging hip-hop culture, with most of us either rapping, DJing, or doing graffiti. Additionally, my affinity for technical drawing found encouragement from a teacher who steered me towards architecture when the school finally pressed us to make a selection on career paths. At that point, I had not met or interacted with any architect. However, I had been driving past several Convenor design buildings in Soweto that I had instinctively fallen in love with, both for their simplicity and the resource they provide the community. In the year 2000, I registered for my first year of architectural technology at the Wits Technikon, now part of the university's reconstituted into the University of Johannesburg. The staff complement was all white except for one male African lecturer who you couldn't count on for racial solidarity or empathy. Demographically, most of the students came from low and middle class families, and there was an unspoken understanding that our destiny was to serve a graduate of the then elite South African universities. Additionally, there was a standard patronizing attitude where speaking in a township accent could be deployed to make conceptual ideas arrive easier. A group of us across the student body constellated around each other based on our involvement in various ways in the cultural scene of Johannesburg. Central to this was a shared affinity for Rastafarianism with its implied Pan-Africanism. Therefore, for most of us in this group, it was clear that we would not survive in an environment that foreclosed any of our aspirations to be architects. In the same group, my future business partner, Tsepo, had started inviting me to his rented cottage in Melville. In these smoke-filled sessions, we would discuss what it might mean to run a practice that was Black and guided by an African and Rastafarian ethos. I need to insert a disclaimer here. I was 19, and my conception of both involved setting up an office on a mountaintop with a doobie in one hand and a pencil in the other. Measured against that image, we might be considered failures. In 2003, following a stint in practice for his obligatory second-year internship, Tsepo set up a drafting office at 44 Stanley, exactly where Kate Oaten's office currently is, and we produced some of the best bathrooms and alterations within what was permissible for SACAP's registration category for a draftsperson. I started frequenting the office, using it as a base for working on assignments and beginning to plant seeds into joining the practice. Tsepo, my senior by a year, had made it very clear that he was not returning to the university and was more interested in building a rapport in the profession. In our discussions, we had tacitly agreed that I would be the sacrificial lamb, return to varsity, and eventually return to practice. Life never pans out as you plan. In the intervening years, I found myself repeating my second year for 3 years, following an inability to find a practice that could employ me to complete my obligatory internship. Everyone shrugged their shoulders when I asked for assistance. Additionally, I had started building a parallel career within the university, first being a lecturer's assistant to being a sessional lecturer, which would be the eventual seeds of my current position as a lecturer and convener for the Architectural History and Theory program at the Graduate School of Architecture. In 2004, I finally completed my second year, following a stint at Silvio Vasconcelos Architects, where George Ferrao, the partner, mentored me. We worked on a range of work from a fast food spot in Rosettenville, where I measured and redrew unsanitary oil fryers, to council offices in Uganda, with my primary role being a technologist. I then worked in another office in the north of Johannesburg, where I primarily worked on commercial and residential projects. I continued my part-time studies in what was then BTech management, in a BTech management course. I followed that up the following year with a BTech design degree, which would allow me to pursue a postgraduate study. I had sustained relationships with Tsepo, who, with his then partner and eventual wife, Violet, had moved to Malawi to remove themselves from Johannesburg's proverbial Babylon. The excursions eventually led to Dar es Salaam in Tanzania, where we started getting small projects, supporting international firms, notably IPA architects, with whom we continue to work. In this period, we delivered small projects from bank alterations and work for Volkswagen, collaborating with various firms based in Tanzania. I had also registered to study for a postgraduate planning degree at the University of Pretoria, as my interests increasingly shifted to urban and legislative matters. To this end, I even started to have the audacity to take polemic outsider positions on architecture and urbanism, which I occasionally managed to get published. Tsepo, on the other hand, had begun studying towards a degree in environmental sciences and is due to complete his master's at the end of this year. At some point, Violet and Tsepo were pregnant with their daughter, Samora, as in Machel, the Mozambican Pan-Africanist, which would catalyze the start of our business. Tsepo and Violet would have to return from their travel and settle back in South Africa for more established obstetrics and medical facilities, at least then. Coincidentally, this was when I had walked into my former employer's office to discover that the pay scales were coincidentally racialized, with all the black staff earning the least regardless of their position and experience. I spent the rest of the morning drafting my resignation letter, which I issued the same day. I spent the rest of the month regretting my decision as I realized that I had no savings and had rent due at the end of the month. In some ways, Samora's birth and my ego were the first ingredients that started our practice in 2013, a year before we had agreed we would start our business. In what follows, I will unveil anecdotes that have sculpted our practice's evolution over the past decade, stories of trial and triumph that have propelled us forward. In between, I've sprinkled how we work in hopes that our haphazard early years will demystify practice and entrepreneurship for younger and aspiring architects. We moved into our office, which was my house, in March of 2013. I had secured a one-year lease on an apartment on the back of my previous employment before my 3-month bank statements would not allow my lease. We split the 2-bedroom house into an office and a bedroom, my only room. I would wake up, shower, and be in the office at no cost, and occasionally in my pajamas. We would have home-cooked meals and dinner with both our partners in the makeshift reception area, which was really just our barren lounge filled with cheap second-hand furniture. On several occasions, the smell of lintels enveloped clients as they walked into the space. How we got away with this, I still wonder. Around the same time, we hired an administrator who became our first staff. We had anticipated a swell of business, but there were only a few calls to answer and no business to speak of. There would be awkward occasions when she would come into the office and we had absolutely nothing for her to do. For a while, she would be cold calling potential sources of business. She would have to offer prosaic responses when asked about the company's details. Occasionally, I would jump up and down gesturing her to stop as she either oversold us or offered services that were not even within our scope. At that point, I had also started building our social media footprint. We unfortunately found ourselves having to compete with the proverbial architect from around the corner who was always cheaper. After about 3 years and no direct paying leads from our social media platforms and website, we redirected our efforts towards making direct contact with potential clients. We registered and visited all developer conferences in Johannesburg, where we shamelessly handed out professionally printed portfolios to anyone who would vaguely represent success. At this point, if you wore a shiny suit, you were getting our attention. Our first client was a big short auditor who was then working for Sizwe Nzaluba Goboto, the most prominent black-owned auditing firm at the time. It would later merge with Grant Thornton to form S&G Grant Thornton. He had found out, and I quote, an interesting profile at a friend's place. He made it known that he had not met young black architects and wanted to give us a try, as he had been given a shot when he was younger. We mustered all our design arsenal, and we spent the next week working to respond to a brief that required a homely environment where he could occasionally farm because he was a rural boy. We built models and completed conceptual 3D models within 4 days and advised that we were ready to come see him. We told our romantic partners that we were headed to Sizwe Nzaluba Goboda's offices to blow him and his wife away. We arrived timelessly and sat in the lobby feeling like the center of the world's orbit. We entered the boardroom, set up our models, and readied our presentation. The client then walked in to the boardroom with his wife. The first comment was picking on our wrinkled t-shirts and flip-flops, and it was downhill from there, with each joke making us insecure about what we were about to show him. To our fears, the presentation was not received well, and we returned with our heads down to our office to try again. The presentations would continue in that manner for several more times until he invited us on a Saturday afternoon, requesting that we bring our laptops and pencils to draw the house with him. We abandoned all our plans and found ourselves in the boardroom with a whiteboard, a projector, and scraps of paper for drawing. He asked us to watch a scene of a spiral staircase and a double volume entry from a Tyler Perry movie, and another from Godfather that he had asked us to watch with no luck. We obliged and drew the house as he effectively designed it. Eventually, we produced the derivative of a Tuscan villa, something we had known but had been in denial about. The house would be built and form part of the work we never featured. However, the fees sustained our office for about 8 months, given our lean and low salaries. He is a client we've retained and has referred at least 3 more clients whose work was more in line with our brand. Following the completion of the project, we reconvened and had a heart-to-heart, which was extremely uncomfortable, but also illuminated that we had not listened to the client or made them feel comfortable about exploring alternatives. Following this experience, we started using Pinterest to build quick mood boards that would be attached to quotes to help fast-track the client's ability to connect to spaces, but also see what is possible. Additionally, what the document also did was give us some leverage with clients where we could prove that we understood their desires as a start. We could then use that starting point to slowly move them towards a position where both of us could be satisfied by the result. We have continued to use Pinterest as it is a quick and cheap way to ascertain the project requirements and direction without investing your design resources. The post-project reflections are still an essential tool that has ensured that we are constantly modifying our practice to be more responsive to clients and what we can, and so that we can reflect on how we can improve our service. After about 6 months in existence, we realized we had made a mistake in hiring an administrator, and fortunately managed to convince a mentor to employ her as a favor. That particular lesson taught us something important, which is we need to start hiring based on identifiable needs within the business. Additionally, it became clear that interfacing with the public was our responsibility, as it was effectively specialist and service businesses, which architecture is, are associated with the business owners. In 2016, when we realized that we had barely survived the first 3 years, but most importantly survived, decided that we could start being more adventurous. My girlfriend and later wife, Mxolisi Makhubo, had moved into the office or house, and as much as she supported the hustle, it was clear that the 18-hour shifts were starting to eat into her life too. Therefore, we had to find an office in the area with minimal costs. We signed a lease at a Regus office, a serviced office supplier, which came with a reception service, an upgrade on our instant coffee, and enough space to have a draftsperson we were training, and another we could mentor. Mpo Mushala filled the latter position. A year earlier, I had returned to complete my master's qualification, which would allow me to get registered as an architect. The issue had already proven to be a challenge as the projects we got increasingly reached more complexity. Although a former boss had offered to support and sign off on some of our work. The condition was that we handed her the final 2 stages in the SACAP scope of professional services. Stages 5 being construction and stage 6 being closeout. Tsepo gave me his full blessings to return to university, effectively full-time, and offered to take on the bulk of the load and reduce my role to drawing, which I would do in between class and after classes. Tsepo would handle all the site visits, and I would take the pic, and I would ensure that all the presentation work was done. Around this time, we had also established that presentations were no longer financially viable for us. We started factoring a course for 3D renders, which we subcontracted to a former undergraduate classmate, Clifford Mtweta, who had recently resigned from Paragon to go on his own. The relationship proved fruitful as it helped him in the initial phases, but also freed us up to focus on the business's financial aspects and develop a more sustainable client base. At this point, 90% of all the work we had undertaken was private residential work. We knew we had to diversify our portfolio to make more significant profit margins. We understood that the public sector was the most logical path. However, when we looked at institutions like the JDA, there was a clear preference for a particular type of architect. We understood that we were unlikely to receive any work there. We then decided to pursue a public sector work. We took out a loan to ensure that our business met all the statutory requirements. We now had a lawyer, an accountant, who could ensure we complied with legislation. We took out professional indemnity that we only then realized we had needed all along. We then used the bulk of the loan to travel to any tender briefing within driving distance and occasionally where we could fly. After about a year, we had not received any work, not even a toilet. We were sitting with a debt of approximately 300,000 directly and indirectly from the decision. We then piggybacked from a friend, African Bata's office space, as we needed to get lean. By this point, we had become accustomed to precarity and reverted into ensuring that we secure the private residential work that had sustained us to that point, and increasingly started offering construction services. On the back of a NHBRC certification and a relationship we had built up with Emmanuel Mugwena, a contractor who would later become a partner in an offshoot construction firm. At the end of 2016, I completed my master's with no fanfare. I took on a role of an assistant tutor for the architectural history and theory program at UJ. Interestingly, in instances that I had mentioned my academic work to clients, it instantly legitimized our practice. And I've seen clients skip from evaluating our portfolio work to discussing their own academic careers and aspirations. In retrospect, the affiliation to the university has fast-tracked the building of rapport with clients. On the back of work we had completed, we also started getting clients who were increasingly prepared to pay higher fees as we communicated the added value we could offer them. In some weird, ironic way, we also started getting clients with public profiles who appreciated that we had respected previous non-disclosure agreements with their friends, and we built a niche in some circles on the lack of a public profile. By 2017, in our 5th year in business, we had started to build up some confidence. We had partnered with an interior decorator who fashioned herself as an interior designer on work for MTN's offices and rebranding strategy. The interior decorator had been our client on a job we had completed for her in the upmarket Copperleaf estate in Centurion. She was clearly in over her head, and we effectively oversaw all the work to completion, which was evident to the project managers who reached out to us directly for the rollout of the subsequent phases of work, where they also asked us to provide a 10-key solution. We quickly set up Blackboard Constructs, a construction firm that could take on the work. We then employed Blackboard Design Lab as architects to provide the architectural service. That contract led us to several more interior fit-out jobs, which required less from us, but provided more significant profit in our role as contractor. By the end of 2018, we had completed paying back the bank, but had a letter from SARS on outstanding tax, which was above 200,000. We looked for our accountant, who had closed shop without notice and returned to full-time employment. We had made the terrible mistake of leaving all our tax-related issues to an accountant who needed to be qualified to handle them, who wasn't sufficiently qualified to handle them. It was an important lesson for Tsepo and me to ensure that we had more regular financial meetings and an understanding of every aspect of our business, even if it was superficial. Tsepo undertook training in SAGE, the accounting application, and got certified, and we continued to use it for payroll, invoicing, and project feasibility studies. And obviously, with the assistance of a new professional architect who comes at a slightly heftier price. In 2018, on the back of profits we had managed to make from the MTN work, we bought a stake in my architect SA, an architectural firm in Durban owned by Mxolisi Makhubo, who I was introduced to by another architect, friend, Kaya Kwalela, who runs Iqaiya Design Workshop. This had followed multiple discussions at CRITS at the University of Tshwane University of Technology. This arrangement allowed for a minor restructuring of our practice. We divided our total staff into 70-30, with Blackboard retaining 30% of the staff in the Johannesburg office. At the same time, the other team would be based in Durban, KwaZulu-Natal. The relationship offered both firms the leverage of our portfolios and the resources to deliver a greater scope of projects. Given Sboniso's more streetwise persona, he has fulfilled the role of running the entire country looking for work. Tsepo and I run the offices and focus primarily on attracting private sector business, which requires an entirely different approach. Structurally, we've retained both firms' identities to leverage their existing brands. This arrangement allows us in some ways to call Blackboard Design Lab the private sector firm. At the same time, we consider my architect the more public sector firm. The arrangement has also meant that we can distinguish the investment required for a project to be profitable, which determines what resources and effort we allocate. For instance, should a client need a project that aligns with our long-term brand aspirations, that project will be given to Blackboard and sometimes cross-subsidized as a long-term strategy. Additionally, all our administration is primarily handled in Durban. An example is the Mangrove restaurant we completed in 2020 at the onset of COVID-19, or of the COVID-19 lockdown. As the project is a restaurant that deals with heritage and is also public-facing, we diverted resources. We lowered our rates to deliver it at cost. The investment was worthwhile as we then managed to find and complete 4 other projects on the back of it. However, our public sector work is done under my architects to address the potential branding risks and provide a greater staff complement when bigger projects come up. However, given my role at the Graduate School of Architecture, I found myself working more at home and on occasion scribbling instructions in between things. WhatsApp has become a primary mode for issuing urgent instructions and has allowed me to survive while working remotely. Moreover, having worked with Mpo and Kundai for over 5 years, we've been able to delegate and trust them with some decisions. I make time to visit the office as often as possible, even if it means I set up weekend meetings. In conclusion, it's not easy, and if anything, I hope our firm and the roller coaster that has been the past 10 years shows you that you can do it and likely do it better. You do not need permission from anyone. Young people need to start firms because that is the only way to sustain our profession's relevance. Additionally, it is not necessary to understand everything when you start out. Everyone is faking it. I hope that as we start the next 10 years, we will be able to create a nurturing environment for the next generation of architects, especially women, so that they don't make the same mistakes we did. I hope that we also create an environment that doesn't stifle individual growth as we also attempt to build our own. Thank you.
Thank you so much. What a fascinating and entertaining narrative. I think I've learned a lot from what you've shared. You know, I was going to ask you if there was anything that you would do differently, but I think you spoke about so many things that I suspect you would do differently that I'm not going to ask you that. As I said earlier, if anybody has any comments, we'll be able to see them in the chat, or if anybody would like to ask any questions, please raise your hand. And I know Mxolisi would be happy to respond to any queries that you have, or any thoughts or any reflections. It doesn't have to be a question. It can be a comment that you might want to share. So I'd like to invite you to put your hand up, put your microphone on, put your camera on so we can see you, and to ask any questions that you might have. And I see that Azra Saleh has her hand up. Azra, would you like to go ahead and ask a question?
Apologies, I'm using Azra's laptop, and
okay.
I'm Emmanuel, yes.
Manuel, okay.
So basically, a quick comment on my side is that I liked the transparency in terms of like what you mentioned in terms of the architectural world at large, which is something that we don't really hear about and get to know and get to see like the other side of architecture and how difficult it may be to some stages, especially since you're in school. You don't really understand the financial side, and you basically touching on those lines and those bases, I think it opens up a bigger, broader perspective in terms of things that we need to look out for. And it's basically something that I really enjoyed so much from your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Manuel.
Thank you.
And I see Sandile Ngobo has a question. Mxolisi, how's the business of architecture in South Africa post-COVID?
It's tough, you know. It's extremely tough, and I think, as many architects can attest, but I think we've now started getting work from people that we interacted with 8 years ago, and they're coming back. They have a bit more money, and so as tough as it is, I think it's also about like sticking it out, you know. And I think there's a trust that you build up with your clientele once they know that you're not kind of like an architect who's really waiting to find a job. And then they give you opportunities. So it is tough, but I think there are still opportunities for work.
Thanks for that. And Heather says, I think we've all been through the pajamas in the home office phase. There's another question from Tumi. Tumi, would you like to ask your question? Please feel free to turn your camera on so we can see you if you'd like to.
I wanted to ask you, what's your take about big developers such as Upland, Atterbury, Moorman, not giving work to Black professionals and women professionals? Thanks.
Ooh, Tumi, opening up a very difficult topic. Unfortunately, it's not the only space where Black professionals don't get work. If it provides any comfort, there are a lot of emerging young Black developers who are doing work, and I think if you build up a relationship with those and you grow with them, it's the only way. I really don't think we can subvert the old boys club. We've tried, we've lost money, and so unfortunately I can't I can't provide any comfort or offer any solutions to that problem.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Tumi. Great question, difficult question.
I'm sure there are some more questions that people have. Please feel free to put your hand up and ask questions. It's a privilege to have a young practitioner like Mxolisi here and sharing his experience. So please Alone has said, I think the best marketing is by word of mouth and referrals from previous clients based on the production of good work and building trusted relationships. I think that speaks to the point Mxolisi's just made about, people that you knew 8 years ago coming back to you because of the trust and the quality of your approach. Thank you for that, Lone. Inviting any other questions or comments that anybody would like to share. Awelani is saying, how was your partner received as a Black South African architect in another African country?
I think South Africa was still in the good books at the time. So it was, and we were involved in cultural stuff. We were both DJing. We were like in some ways involved in organizing festivals. Tepo's wife is big in organizing festivals, and so we were kind of like we entered through the back. So we managed to build relationships outside of architecture, and then make ourselves or build our way into architecture. So at the time, I think we were received quite well.
Okay, thank you. I've got a comment from Dixon. Dixon says, thank you for sharing the journey. I really enjoyed it. And yes, we definitely don't have to know everything to start. And Heather shares, it's extremely difficult to break into the corporate world. Maybe finding a new way with emerging developers is the way to go. Jabu saying many young architects start with competitions to build their portfolio and get their names out there. What's your view about competitions? Have you participated in any competitions?
In the initial phase, we did. We spent like there was a time when we were sitting for about 8 months in the first year of business, and we had only one job, or one paying job, and we investigated, like other firms, and it seemed like that was the way to go. But there was also the reality that most competitions in South Africa, there's a short list even before competitions are set up. They shortlist preferred architects, and we stood no chance. And so after about 2 years, we stopped working on any competitions because it had not made sense. And what we did instead, which is maybe important, we started going to people we suspected had some kind of money, and we offered them ways to use their money through investing in some built environments projects.
Very good. There's a question from Kamal, and then Finzi. Dr. Sadie has his hand up, so I'm just going to read out Kamal's question, and then we'll go to Finzi. And Kamal asks, what strategies or recommendations do you suggest for effectively communicating the value of paying architectural fees in full to clients who may not fully grasp the significance of these fees in the design and construction process?
Thanks, Kamal. That's a great question. So in our experience, what would happen is in the architectural circle, there were certain types of clients who we whispered about, and actually didn't, everyone didn't want that kind of client. These were typically Black, nouveau rich Black people, and no one paid attention to kind of developing them as clients. And what in the initial years, we spent a lot of time actually sitting with clients, taking them through the value of an architect, what an architect is, including those clients that we lost initially. So I think the trick is to actually understand that you need to be patient. The majority of South Africans have never really employed the services of an architect. And so I think it's important that we take time to actually develop and invest in the majority of South Africans, which happen to be largely Black.
Okay, and so I'd now like to hand over to Finzi Sadie, Dr. Finzi Sadie, who's head of the Department of Architecture at the University of Johannesburg. Finzi, would you like to share your reflection or pose your question to Mxolisi?
Yes, thank you, Mark, and thank you, Mxolisi, for sharing your very interesting, inspiring, and journey that shows resilience. So thank you very much for that. I have sort of a comment and a question. First one is, yes, I believe that you must, as practicing architects, grow your clientele and get more work. But after 10 years, have you looked back to think that perhaps what we are doing as architects is pursuing a very narrow piece of the pie of the work that is available there? And what would that be? I say so because I think I always have this debate about corporate clients versus government. And I know that government is really one of the biggest clients. And do you think that architects, current architects, have addressed making or accessing more government work? Because that is a source of a big investment for the next 100 years, especially in Africa. So as we prepare for the year 2000, how can architects prepare themselves to be part and parcel of that huge infrastructure investment that everyone knows is going to happen in Africa? So it's two questions in one about practice, the other one perhaps about what education could contribute to prepare practicing architects better. Thank you. I don't know whether it's clear, but I would like your response.
Thanks, Doc. It's a tough question, but I'll attempt to answer it from how we've looked at the problem. For us, it's been always clear that we won't always be kind of like architects with a capital A, which is why I'm pursuing my PhD. Tsepo is pursuing his qualification in environmental sciences. And so as we attempt, but also what we've also done is we've pivoted our business to do more construction. So in anticipation of kind of a shift in the business, but also in terms of the kind of things we would like to do, we've also realized that we also need to learn, like continuous professional development. And we are deliberately going out of our way to find more work with government because we genuinely believe there are relationships we can build up with the public sector in order to make change, that now we have some kind of social capital to leverage to make it happen.
And education?
Education, I think education, Docs, comes, you have to be educated. I think there's no getting around like learning, you know. I'm pursuing my PhD for that reason. Tsepo is pursuing his studies for that reason. And what we are envisioning is that we will slowly move towards a different service offering in the business and allow younger architects to come into the firm and kind of replace us as the designers. At least that's the way I see the business going in the next 10 years or so, while we open up other avenues to provide services to the public sector, including capacity building for the state, which I think is essential.
Thank you.
Thank you, Doc. We can continue the conversation.
Some more comments. One comment is great presentation. This is from Sean. He says, great presentation regarding the tax situation. This has come up in other presentations I have been in. Do you think that a small portion of time should be spent on the financial aspect to avoid your SARS situation?
Absolutely. You know, I remember when we got the email from SARS, and I remembered all the practice lectures where I spent on my WhatsApp texting people, where I could have preempted this. So I think definitely, like, I think practice and finances are very boring. And I think a lot of firms actually don't spend enough time in that part of the business. And which is why, like also in my presentation, I've tried to emphasize that, because we've found ourselves, we've put in all the energy into design and everything else except the financials. And all the moments when we almost were out of business have been directly related to finances.
Great, and there's somebody with their hand up, His Excellency Emmanuel. So I don't know if you'd like to ask a question, and there's a couple more questions to read out.
Okay, I had some mic issues. Hope everyone can still hear me.
We can hear you.
Okay, so my question is, how can someone who's basically close to graduation or who's about to leave their postgrad, jumping into the world of architecture as a whole, how can they better equip them? What would you advise a young architect who's coming up who also wants to be in a space of practicing and building a huge practice in future?
I think you have to start with something, you know. In some ways, I think we started slightly late. I have a good friend, African Bata, who I think started 5 years before we did. But you got to start, you know. And I think the hardest thing is to realize that there's no getting around it, but starting. Find someone who needs to redo their toilet and start with that. Offer your services in the event. Like, I know there's contractions in the profession, but if it means you offer your services, especially because you guys don't have any debt yet, find work and produce something, make something, do something, build your portfolio right now of real work. Do work that makes you face clients, because that is a total shift from the university. And face rejection. The sooner you start, I think the quicker you start to build the thick skin, which is essential.
I think that's good advice, Mxolisi. Lemasea is saying, I'm intrigued by you alluding to the importance of cultural connections. And I'm not quite sure if I understand the question correctly, and don't refer to it in your answer to the Old Boys Network. How is your DJing different?
I like to think I've got like 3 split personalities, and I still like, one is a DJ, one is an academic, one is a practicing architect, and they are not always in sync. But I've gotten work on the back of DJing, which is another important point. I think clients are interested in people who are interesting, you know, and the more interesting stuff you do, even if you're not the best DJ, you are able to have interesting conversations with clients, which makes them remember you. So I think culture, Old Boys Club, yeah, we all need to start chopping away at it. And I'm aware that, like, even in our own practice, it took us years to actually employ our first female staffer. And that's something that we've been consciously trying to work on. And we anticipate that when we eventually have to attract partners into the business, it will be female. Not only to tick boxes, but also there's a kind of dynamism that is lacking in the practice that I've seen in female colleagues that I think we could benefit from. So that's kind of how we are hoping we will play or make a difference.
I think I perhaps didn't ask Lemasea's question properly because the hand is up. So Lemasea, do you want to ask your question directly?
I think what you said earlier on, which I think is most important, which is, you know, the fact of you being an interesting person. I genuinely think that we underplay the importance of who we are. We underplay the importance of actually engaging and connecting with our clients. We underplay the idea that you are going to offer them something that is intrinsically they would see worth in. and then spend a lot more time thinking that the fact that you've got an idea, that idea will be taken up almost immediately, and hence belittle the fact that the old boys network clubs are not based and built from nothing.
Yeah. They're
built from time, they're built from relations, they're built from finding connections and commonalities. And maybe just maybe, and it's a comment not necessarily to you, but possibly to the younger amongst us, in dwelling about them developing themselves a little bit more holistically, that they become interesting human beings before they actually become fantastic architects. I don't know how they would do that, but it would be an amazing thing if in our endeavor we were indeed developing people that are able to connect with other people and therefore hopefully even make better architecture. That to me is what I was hoping you would dwell on. I do not believe we will ever bring down the Old Boys Network. I think we stand a greater chance of making our own.
Absolutely. I couldn't have said it better, and I think your stately voice also makes the point you make arrive much easier. Thank you.
Great. No, that was really very thoughtful response, I think. So there are three more questions. Well, two questions and one comment. So I think we'll go through those and then we will bring the session to a close. It's another question from Lone, and she asks, are you members of an architectural institution, GIFA, for example? If so, have you gained any benefit from this? The institutions are always trying to find out how young architects' practices would see any value in membership.
I am members of GIFA. I am a member of GIFA, and at some point I was part of the transformation committee. We would occasionally meet, have discussions, disappear, meet, and 3 years went by, and to be honest, there wasn't any real tangible results from the gatherings, and at some point it started to feel like some kind of tick box committee. So at this point, I'm a member, but I'm not involved in any committees at the moment.
Thanks for that. Another comment from Heather. She says, I think it's exceptionally hard to start a practice in the current economic environment. Mxolisi is right. You have to start hustling. We all started by bathroom alterations and backyard extensions. And to close off, another question from Jabu. And Jabu asks, what message do you have for the profession, including the institutes, on the importance of mentorship, both to students and young practitioners, especially with your experience when you were a student and as a lecturer to students that require internship to complete their programs?
Oh, Jabu's asking really, that's a question that's very close to my heart. And Mark, I think you also know, coordinating the second-year diploma for the past year and a half, which I'm slowly exiting out of, I realized that the situation for primarily Black students who come through the diploma course has not shifted significantly enough since I was a student. And this was, I was a student in the early 2000s. Students don't find work. Students don't find opportunities. There's still like a kind of network where the irony of it is that we have Black professionals who don't interact with the university, which I don't blame them for the history of kind of the way institutions have treated Black professionals. So you kind of have this self-fulfilling situation where Black students don't get opportunities of employment, and therefore become students who don't have the experience necessary as the requirements of SACAP. So we are in, you know, like, and the profession is increasingly become irrelevant. And I think that it's directly related to how we've treated young people and excluded young people. And I think there is absolutely no way that the profession will gain any trust in our society unless we get students, especially young students, involved in the game. I think the gatekeeping is too much. There's a lot of gatekeeping. I once applied at a university that shall not be named, and I was told, it was hinted that I was applying to get BE work. You know, there's a whole ecosystem that has excluded a certain type of people from institutions. And I think until it's dealt with, architecture as a profession will remain in a precarious situation.
Thank you for that.
I hope I kind of answered your question, Jim.
And then there's a question from LVT, well, not a question, a comment, a really nice comment, I think, an apposite comment, LVT Architects. And they say, thanks for sharing your journey. I do not feel so lonely when I hear about your struggle to obtain work. Well done keeping at it. And then the last comment is, last question from Mawati, says, you opened with a beautiful song. Do you have any song recommendations for us to listen to tonight, which can inspire us in our architectural practices?
Since architecture is about space, Sun Ra, space is the place.
Maybe you can type. Oh yeah, that's Botomelo is typing it in. Sun Ra.
Yeah. Space is the place. And I recommend you listen to it with your eyes closed, the lights switched off, and preferably naked.
Is it space in the place or space of the place?
Is the place.
Is the place.
Yes.
Okay, lovely. And then there's another comment. I think we have to close after this. And it's from Keetsitse Losaba. And they say, thank you for sharing your journey. I feel as a Black woman and mother and architect, something has to give. I have applied to be a tutor and I didn't get it. I find that being young, Black and female is tough in this career. Top it off as a parent, you drop down to the bottom of the list of candidates. I think that's a very profound statement, and something that I think we all know resonates very much within our profession. And as Mxolisi says, I think we have to act on that and move on that. But I think at this point, we've had a really interesting discussion. Thank you so much to everybody who's participated in the discussion. And Mxolisi, I think you raised a lot of really thoughtful questions, a lot of interesting thoughts. I was hoping to have heard a little bit more about the DJ side, but I guess that's another talk. But also just to congratulate you, I think this is exactly the sort of conversation that I think it's useful to have. Design is a really critical, central element, fundamental part of architectural practice, but how we design or how we put ourselves in the position to be able to design and to be able to operate as architects, and how we understand our roles as architects beyond the role of designers, as you have shared yourself and Seppo are exploring now within the range of your own practice, I think is really, really very, very valuable. A really valuable lesson and very valuable for you to share that. And I'd like to thank you for your sharing your practice with us, your formation, your stories. I think you're a really good raconteur. I think there's a lovely cadence to your story. And I think everybody here definitely enjoyed it this evening. So thank you very much. I would like now to just share with you, before we close off, the fact that we will be having a few more of these lectures, as I shared earlier. This is part of a series of lectures on practice. This is the second. On the 12th of September, we're going to be having Isabelle Jolicoeur, her practice Atypique, with Christina Rack in Haiti, sharing her reflections. And I know Isabelle's joined us this evening. Thanks for joining us this evening, Isabelle. She'll be sharing work and reflections on her own practice, which also combines a range of kind of operations, not just design. I think it's an activist practice in many ways in Port-au-Prince in Haiti. And then following on from her, Lemon Pebble from Johannesburg, Tanzania and Althea, who've both been actively involved with the school, Kate Norton on the 26th, and Atelier Vidal down in a very successful young Jamaican practice. I think it'll be really valuable for those of you who have been interested in conversations with Dixon and Mxolisi to participate in those. I'm looking forward to us sharing, and also Kate's on the 26th. And on that note, just before we sign off, I'm just going to hand over to Boitumelo, who's going to talk to you about CPD points that you can get from this event.
Thank you very much, Mark. So as Mark has said, to get your CPD points, your certificate, there will be a link shared in our chat. So please click on that link and fill out the MS Teams form, and we will send you your CPD certificate as soon as possible. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Boitumelo, and thank you, and also the ops team, and to Chinea, who's here helping us this evening, and to Fred for his lovely graphics, and most of all to you, Mxolisi, for a really illuminating and insightful presentation this evening. And thank you so much. And we're going to end with what we started, which is actually Pepper Wemba and Bakwe too. We haven't got Sun Ra in our memory, so we can't play that. Maybe we'll introduce the next lecture with that. So thank you, everybody, and good night.